Hey, well that was kind of harsh, right? Well, today let's give it up for prominent black Republicans of our history. Sometimes their stories get lost and forgotten when we're talking about slavery. But let's not forget that the leaders of the past were always Republicans. So let's get into it about Charles Caldwell. That's right, the greatest and baddest man. Let's hear his story. And as always, let's get after it. Let's go.
Few fates were worse than being sold down the river, a phrase that, from its very beginning, meant not just a betrayal, but a betrayal that leads to a significantly worse situation. Nobody wanted to be a slave in Mississippi. In the first place, Mississippi had a climate and geography that was ideal for large-scale plantations, especially those producing cotton, sugar, and rice. These crops were labor-intensive crops that required long, strenuous hours of work, often under very harsh conditions. Secondly, black people in Mississippi during this time were subject to oppressive conditions. Enslaved people faced grueling labor on plantations, working in agriculture, primarily cultivating cotton and other crops that formed the backbone of the state's economy. Black Americans endured physical abuse, severe punishment, neglect, malnutrition, extremely long working hours, and generally lived in deplorable living conditions. Families were often torn apart, as they could be sold or separated at the whim of their white enslavers. Slaves were denied basic rights and freedoms, treated as property, and had no legal status or autonomy. The state's legal system supported and protected the interests of slaveholders, ensuring that the institution of slavery remained intact. Despite the unimaginable hardships they faced, enslaved black Americans in Mississippi demonstrated resilience, maintaining cultural practices, traditions, and community bonds. They often relied on oral traditions to pass down stories, knowledge, and resistance strategies from one generation to the next. This is the environment into which Charles Caldwell was born and lived his whole life. His birth year is believed to be 1831, though precise details about his early life remain unknown. Born into slavery, Caldwell later became a skilled blacksmith in Clinton, a small town near Jackson, Mississippi. As a result of his craftsmanship, Caldwell enjoyed relatively more autonomy compared to other plantation slaves, earning him significant respect within the community. After the Civil War, his status allowed him to venture into politics. In 1868, Caldwell was one of 16 black Republicans who actively participated in the Mississippi Constitutional Convention. However, the proposed constitution they crafted was ultimately rejected in a statewide referendum. Despite this setback, Caldwell's involvement in politics marked a pivotal moment for his journey from a life of slavery to one of influence and participation in shaping Mississippi's political landscape. In 1870, he was elected to the Mississippi State Senate. He served in the Senate for 5 years, and during this time he became known as a staunch radical Republican, voting for both the 14th and 15th Amendments, as well as additional measures to bring racial equality to the state. Caldwell's primary focus during his time in office was resisting a wave of anti-Republican and anti-black violence, which spread through Mississippi as anti-Reconstruction Democrats were determined to reclaim the state legislature. It is estimated that between 1870 and 1875, the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist organizations killed several hundred black men and women, as well as some white Republicans. Despite the violence, Caldwell believed in...
Isn't it interesting how nowadays we have the current Democratic Party always screaming about white supremacy when they are the ones that originated white supremacy and still perpetrate it to this day in disguise. They do it as white allyship, but realize they're not allies. They're basically the same but a different guys. They basically, from what I can see, traded in cotton and rice and the slaves of the field for now the slaves of the mind. And instead of using those products, they now use music. sex, and gender instead of rice, grain, and wheat, and cotton. I'm just putting that out there, but the Democrats are still the same. They're still abusing a lesser class, which is the influx of immigrants into the country today, for the sake of profit and power. And that is always their guise. It's just the medium change. They're not cracking whips anymore. They're just destroying freedoms. Let's continue.
Political process, and in 1875, he invited a prominent Democratic speaker to open a major Republican Party rally before the election. Mississippi started allowing freedmen to vote in 1867, setting the stage for the 1875 election to further integrate black men into the state's political landscape. The Mississippi Republican Party scheduled political rallies on September 4th at Utica, Clinton in Hinds County, and Vernon in neighboring Madison County, anticipating the November 2nd polls. Clinton, just under 10 miles west of Jackson, the state capital, saw black Republican families congregate at Moss Hill, a former plantation ruined by Union forces during the 1863 Vicksburg campaign. Attendance varied from estimates of 1,500 to 2,500, mostly freedmen and their kin, enjoying a day of picnicking and political discourse. Around 75 white attendees were present, including 18 armed, intoxicated whiteliners, essentially the Democratic Party's paramilitary branch of ex-Confederate soldiers and their kin in Mississippi. Anticipating racial tensions, Republican Governor Adelbert Ames was supposed to address the crowd. But instead, Captain H.T. Fisher, a former Union officer and local Republican newspaper editor, took his place. Emphasizing open discussion and educating new voters about elections, Caldwell and other Republican leaders from Hinds County invited the local Democratic Party to send a speaker. Democratic State Senate candidate Amos R. Johnston spoke for an hour without disruption. However, when Fisher took the stand, whiteliners from Raymond heckled him. Republican organizers, including Caldwell, pleaded for peace, but the afternoon's events quickly spiraled into violence. Eugene Wellborn, another rally organizer, recounted the whiteliners drawing weapons and aiming at the crowd. He likened the sudden burst of gunfire to a downpour, resulting in 3 white and at least 5 black deaths.
Do you see how that energy is completely identical to what's going on today? Just the physical medium of it has changed. But it's still Democrats today getting a populace emotionally aroused to go against their own means, against a perceived enemy that just wants common respect. And the respect that their perceived enemy wants is actually rights that you actually want for yourself, but you can't listen to it because the Democrats, they pump so much emotional hatred. The current Democratic Party today is doing that. They're misusing our youth in colleges and across campuses, and are misusing our inner city youth through violence and looting and rioting under the perceived enemy of Republican white supremacy, when it's just Republican individualism, which is what we all want, to be treated and respected as individuals without having a collective mindset. That's the rights and liberty of the republic we have today. But that ideal of the Democrats, it's still prevalent today, of collectivism. We collectively want to control a certain sect of the populace to get them to do our bidding through emotional manipulation. That sect for the Democrats has always been the minority vote, which is slowly changing to conservative because they have now shipped in a new slave class. That they now, through the government, the slave owner took care of the slaves. Now the Democrats are making the government, off the taxpayer dollar, take care of the slaves, which are now the imported minority, illegal immigrant class that we are taking care of while they offer nothing to society, just to manipulate and use them for democratic power. It's basically the same old systems of the Confederacy, now inside of the Democratic Party under the guise of democracy, when it's really mental slavery. It's interesting.
Including 2 children. But the September 4th violence was only a precursor to the impending racial massacre. Fueled by baseless rumors of a black plot against the town, Clinton's mayor called for backup. Hundreds of armed whiteliners arrived in Clinton by train, their ranks increasing to several hundred by dusk. Wellborn recounted the brutal hunting of black men by the whiteliners, akin to shooting birds. Sarah Dickey, an Ohioan white educator who moved to Mississippi to teach black women and children, penned a letter to President Ulysses S. Grant recounting the harrowing scene and emphasizing that the true extent of the Clinton massacre was untold. While no additional white Democrats were killed post-September 4, the black death toll was estimated to be between 35 and 50, with many black victims remaining nameless. William P. Hoffa, a white Republican from Pennsylvania running for re-election as a peace justice, was also lynched. Regardless of numerous pleas for federal aid by Governor Ames, Wellborn, Dickey, and others, President Grant declared on September 13th that he was weary of the South's annual autumnal disturbances, leading to a policy of non-intervention in Mississippi and the former Confederacy. This event became known as the Clinton Riot, or...
That right there was a big mistake by Officer Grant, because it allowed the Democrats to now have a pulse to push on to say, like, they don't want to help you. They freed you, but now they don't want to help you. And that would definitely turn an emotional, uneducated populace against their perceived saviors, so to speak. And that's where Grant messed up. He should have completely intervened and sent the troops down there to help them out. There's something in there that just doesn't make any sense to why you would send that many young white boys down to die in the Civil War, but wouldn't maintain that safety. Or at least train up a freed black man militia to be able to defend themselves against so much of the jealousy and revenge that ended up being perpetrated between the Ku Klux Klan and the Democratic Party. That was one of the big mistakes right there. Big time.
more commonly, the Clinton Massacre. But the year's end of 1875 did not conclude the reign of terror in Clinton, despite the high number of victims in September. Caldwell was considered absolutely fearless by his contemporaries, white and black. He was a crack shot, and racists everywhere feared him. Although he used his power for peace, after the massacre, in an act of self-defense, he led a unit of militia through Clinton to protect his community. For that, he was marked for death. So Caldwell's involvement in arranging the event, advocating for black rights, and standing up for black self-defense placed him in the crosshairs of the vicious, racist ruffians who constantly tormented black citizens, who only wanted to exercise their political freedoms. On December 25th,
As I said, another strong black man standing up for his people, but he's not getting enough government support. It's the exact same thing I'm seeing right now with like Wesley Hunt and Byron Daniels and Ben Carson. These are prominent black Republican men that definitely have the pulse on African male prosperity. But without the men believing in these men, they'll never be able to achieve their aims of getting that structure and strength back down to our communities. And the Democrats are doing what? Calling these men by so many derogatory names to keep the people from listening to the message and just getting caught up that they're with the enemy, which, as this story is telling, Republicans have always been on our side. It's just that they didn't come to our aid when we needed them after the Civil War. You know what I'm saying? We formed our own militias because as freed men, we have the right to militia. But war is real. And when you're outnumbered, you're outnumbered. They needed Union soldiers to be down there patrolling the street as if they were police to help these men out. But that didn't happen. And in turn, it allowed these ex-Confederate militias to get powerful and brazen enough to do the atrocities that we are watching right now.
In 75, Caldwell went into the town of Clinton to learn about his nephew who had been threatened earlier that day. An acquaintance of his, Buck Cabell, invited Caldwell to drink a toast in celebration of Christmas. Caldwell did not want to go, preferring to go home to celebrate Christmas with his wife, but his friend was so insistent that he relented. It was a fateful miscalculation. The two men went to the basement of Chilton's store on the northeast corner of Leek and Jefferson Streets. While they stood in the basement, they touched their glasses, apparently a signal for the assassins. Caldwell was shot in the head as he stood with his back to the window. Wounded but still conscious, Caldwell asked to be carried out so he could die like a man. His last request was granted. He was carried out into the street so that all could see he was defiant. Despite his injuries, Caldwell gathered himself together, stood up, straightened his clothes. Then he looked directly at the assassins and said, "Remember, when you kill me, you kill a gentleman and a brave man. Never say you killed a coward. I want you to remember it when I am gone." At that instant, some 40 shots rang out, delivering the fatal blow. His younger brother Samuel, who had nothing to do with politics, was also killed. Later, racist ruffians burst into Caldwell's home where his wife had laid out the bodies of the two brothers and raised a ruckus, turning the bodies out of the coffin and cursing them. Such as cowards do, these men couldn't stand up to Caldwell in life, so they could only do so when he could no longer defend himself. No one was ever punished for the crime or those who murdered innocent people at the Clinton rally. Charles Caldwell.
That's what I'm saying. If Republicans want to understand why the majority of the black vote, regardless of Lyndon B. Johnson, is going to Democrats blindly, it's because of these situations. They really needed their help during Reconstruction, and they didn't help them. I guess they may have felt that they gave up too much during the Civil War, which that's understandable. But you have to continue on forward, or we wouldn't be in a situation in right now while we have so much of the vote blindly going to Democrats for no reason. They can say derogatory terms to us straight out, like, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black. That's insane that you can say that openly, and people still vote for you. They can promote putting some of the most derogatory people in front of the camera, and people still don't see that as a problem. It's because the Republicans didn't show up when they should have. And we're paying for that right now. And not to say that they didn't do their part, because they did. God bless all the Union soldiers, all the Republican Union soldiers that died for me. But I'm just stating on the reason why they were able to manipulate the mind and the emotion. Just remember, 90% of the riots and massacres that happened in the South were done by Democratic white men or Democratic slave owners. You know? And how black men today can't understand that. And even today, they want to call black Democratic men coons. They want to yell out of their names when the people that originally supported you and got you the rights were Republicans. I just don't get it. But this is what we're here to learn. I'm just going to bring the knowledge out.
And other local Southern leaders represented, perhaps better than anyone else, the opportunities that existed under Reconstruction for freed people to develop a potent and responsible class of leaders. That so many influential black people met the same end as Caldwell illuminates the violence on which democratic power ultimately rests.
Yeah.
This has been...
As you can see, the emotional manipulation of black citizens here in the United States is continuing on by the Democratic Party. They just switch mediums and they switch aims, but at the end of the day, they're doing the same thing. They're still importing slaves, illegal immigrants. They're still manipulating the mind of the populace through emotion. And it's only for the game of power through elite collectivism. It's wrong, and it doesn't work for society. So I hope that if my black brothers and sisters can see this message and understand to get off the Democratic plantation currently, because now it's all in the mind, and come back to the Republican Party, that's here to create the individualism that you want, the strength that you need, and the protection that is evident. Because this is the first time that I've noticed in history where the Republican Party can actually give the black community what they want. So, thank you very much for sitting through me this lesson. I'm very happy to learn about another prominent, strong black Republican who lost his life defending the individualism of his people. Let's keep this story going. That's right. Woo! Once again, thank you guys for watching Dino Reacts. And if you like my content, like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, chef's kiss. Mwah!